This video contains spoilers for the world quest Through the Mists. According to the events that we experience in version 2.2 combined with the Thundering Fury set, we learn that the people of Tsurumi believed that the Thunderbird named Kana Kapatser... Kapatser? Why is this story not voice acted? Okay, to be fair, the narrative probably would not have been as detailed because MiHoYo would have had to spend too much time on the voices. But still, I'm going with Kapatser. Deal with it. The people of Tsurumi believed that Kapatser would lead them to their survival. Instead, their activities would ultimately lead them to their destruction. Today, we're going to focus on why the people of Tsurumi worshipped the Great Thunderbird in vain, and psychologically, why people believe in deities to begin with. This is a psychological thing of Teyvat. Let's first take a look at the Thundering Fury set to briefly tell the story of Tsurumi. I'm going to begin with the descriptions of each artifact, narrating the lore with images in the background from the Tsurumi quest. Each artifact tells the story from 5 different angles. If you want to skip the story recap and go straight to the psychology, I'll have a timestamp for you in the description. Let's start off with the Thunder Summoner's Crown. It says, in the ancient tribe that worshipped the Thunderbird, elder shamans wore this crown. The Thunderbird soared through the thunderstorms, raining down purple thunder and rain. Ancient tribes feared its power and thanked it for its blessings. Shamans were chosen to offer blood sacrifices to it for protection and forgiveness. The Thunderbird was still a monster that cared not for the worship of mankind. They knew it not, and regarded the unpredictable actions of the Thunderbird as divine revelations. Yet thunder was its breath, as were the fates of men. From the sky, men were no different than animals, until one day a song pierced through the roaring thunderstorm. The song ripped through the clouds and bestowed upon it light. The survivor of catastrophe says, the lost feather of the Thunderbird, enchanted in purple lightning, it serves as the last witness of the destruction of the tribe. The ancient tribe held the Thunderbird as its protector, but it rained down thunder upon the tribe. On one gloomy night, it shared a pure friendship with a lad. Once it departed, the lad picked up the feather it dropped. I shall sing you another tune when you come again with thunder and rain. Driven to madness by the remorse of a promise unkept, the Thunderbird left the mountains in cinders. It was hunted down years later, slain as a monster. Years passed, the burned land revitalized. The lightning feather was left buried in the vegetation. The story of the Thunderbird and the young lad had all but perished with the tribe. The Thunderbird's mercy says a lightning-infused flower somehow spared the fate of being trodden underfoot or reduced to ash by the furious purple fire, making it the sole survivor on a day of disaster. A purple flower that survived in the volcanic ash, it witnessed the total decimation of the ancient tribe. They made their offerings, waiting for the Thunderbird to reveal the oracles. However, what descended with the Thunderbird was the lightning of destruction. For the transgression against the young lad who sang to it, the sentence was total obliteration. The Thunderbird showed its true nature, wiping the tribe from the face of the earth. The Omen of Thunderstorm says, a ceremonial cup that holds the blood of the innocent. It is brimming with the thundering fury of the prayers that echo within. A ritual goblet used by the shamans of an ancient tribe. It held the blood to be offered to the Thunderbird. In the seasons when the Thunderbird flew amidst the stormy mountains, a young lad sang without fear. Attracted to his voice, the prideful Thunderbird landed by his side. Curious tunes, tiny human. Afraid not the thunder and storms? They said, I can bring peace to the thunder and storms, the young lad paused and answered. The Thunderbird cried, but kept its silence, for his was an enchanting song. It was the first and last meeting between the Thunderbird and the young boy. For the next he saw the boy was when his blood filled the golden goblet on the sacrificial altar. And finally, the Hourglass of Thunder says, the hourglass used to foretell the coming of the Thunderbird by the tribe that worshipped it. it has fallen into eternal silence now that the tribe is no more. A luxurious hourglass made with amethyst and amber gold that belonged to a shaman. The hourglass would serve its purpose for the festival held in the Thunderbird's honor. In the last festival the tribe held, the frenzied Thunderbird blew away the blood-stained altar, the countdown to the tribe's destruction. The Thunderbird decimated the tribe to avenge the one who sang to it. Unbeknownst to the Thunderbird, the lad himself considered his sacrifice as an offering, all for the good of the tribe, for the blessing of the Thunderbird. Now that the story is fresh in our minds, let's dive right into the psychology at play here. And if you can find other psychological concepts in this story, jot them down in the comments because I would love to hear about any of the ones that I may have potentially missed. The psychology behind believing in deities appears to be a developed trait of humanity. Back during the times when we were hunters and gatherers, human beings did not have a need for a belief in a deity. We lived in small, gated tribes of no more than 100 to 150 people, as a result of the terrain being unable to support more in a given area. By living together, we would naturally develop many cognitive mechanisms, one of these being a sense of agency, the belief that one has control over their own actions, and that they can intentionally cause things to happen. For instance, we learn that when we shake an apple tree, an apple falls out, so if we want more apples, we need to shake the tree. Over time, we have begun to recognize that other people also have agency and can intentionally act upon us, which can be both beneficial in terms of cooperation and detrimental in terms of manipulation. We have a hyper tendency to assert that others are intentionally acting even if they may not be. Just think about it. How many times have we gotten angry at MiHoYo for our summons going to pity even though we know that it's RNG? What's happening here is we are unconsciously making the assumption that MiHoYo is intentionally against us. This can oftentimes cause us to be trapped in what is called fundamental attribution error, which explains that humans have a tendency to attribute others' actions to their innate qualities, whereas our own actions are attributed to external sources. For example, I could not beat Senora because her attacks just barely hit me when I dodged them, whereas my friend couldn't beat Senora because he just sucks at the game. This ultimately leads us to assuming, rather unconsciously at times, that there is agency in natural processes and even in inanimate objects. The worship of forest spirits, statues, and even the sun and moon themselves are our attempt to apply agency to natural processes that do not have it intentionally. If you trip over a rock, it cannot be the rock's fault unless you attribute to it agency. Back in the day, when we did not have an explanation for why lightning flashed in the sky, people created an entity named Zeus to apply agency to the concept of storms. And as our knowledge of how these natural occurrences have expanded, these entities have been moved into myth, and agency to natural processes has diminished. The people of Tsurumi likely required an explanation for all of the lightning that the Thunderbird was giving off on their island, and thus began worshipping it as a result. The psychology of giving offerings to deities is also not uncommon in our real-world discourse, but in the case of Tsurumi Island, how do we explain this action if the people of Tsurumi had never encountered outsiders to copy their traditions? The answer is actually quite simple. It likely comes from the universally understood concept of reciprocity and fairness. In order to get something, you must give something in return, and the greater the prize, the greater the sacrifice. In order to live in a society, one must understand this concept in order to functionally exist with other humans, as tipping this scale in either direction can cause destructive conflict, especially within a tight-knit community. So, the people of Tsurumi desired the lightning to cease, as it was disrupting their way of life, and they discovered a deity to worship perched upon their mountain in the hopes that this deity would have pity on them and would quell the lightning. Little did they know that the deity that they were worshipping was the cause of the lightning itself. It is also likely that the offerings did not quell the lightning at all, but to the people's perspective, because they were offering sacrifices, they may have assumed that their sacrifices were contributing to something, so they kept doing it regardless of the outcome over time. This would explain why, at the time of our investigation, there were Surumi residents that were beginning to doubt the ceremonies, as they may have begun to recognize that the sacrifices were not changing the lightning's patterns. This, I contend, was the only moment where the people of Tsurumi could have been saved, but we'll get into that in a second. It was not until Ru began singing that the Thunderbird took notice, which likely briefly quelled the storms. It is unclear if the shamans immediately suspected Ru, or if there were other ceremonies that took place before Ru's singing was determined to be what quelled the storms. But this would have helped justify the sacrifices to the shamans. They would have suspected cause and effect, that all of the sacrifices were not in vain. Equipped with a stern belief, the shamans would have naturally assumed that if the sacrifices were working, and Ru was uniquely important to the Thunderbird, then sacrificing him might quell the lightning forever. Remember, if the desired result is great, then the sacrifice needs to be equally as great. Sadly, history would play out, and the Thunderbird, enraged by the loss of this enchanted song, would reap its revenge upon the island inhabitants, possibly causing its mind to erode from its uncontrollable rage and sending it to Tsurumi Island, where the Shryden Shogun would ultimately cut it down from the skies. All of this from a simple misunderstanding between the worshipper and the worshipped. So how would the people of Tsurumi have escaped this psychological trap, you may be asking? The obvious answer is, of course, meeting people from the outside of the island and sharing information. But it is unclear as to how long the people of Tsurumi have been partaking in their rituals before the outsiders began to show up. They may have already fully justified themselves to the point where no outside influence would have broken through. This is why it is generally encouraged for people to have friends or people that they can trust. Generally, isolation is just not good psychologically. It's important to note that in hindsight, we can conclude that it would have been very difficult for the people to change their opinions regarding a ritual that they had already lost so many of their children in the hopes that the thunder would quell. This is an economic concept known as sunk cost, where the higher investment one has in an action, the more willing they will be to continue regardless of the circumstances. I would suspect that the number of children on the island was beginning to dwindle, and it would make tragic sense if the adults began to think in a twisted way that they should have more children in order to birth more sacrifices. Yeah, let's not think about that one too hard. In the fourth act of the world quest Through the Mists, the traveler experiences the Thunderbird's memories. Once, strange objects fell from the heavens, one of which landed upon this island, after which your sky returned to its clear state. Afterward, the fog started to emerge. Though you had the power to disperse that fog, it meant very little to you either way. So, it would appear as if the fog originated from the objects that rained down either from Celestia itself or was a byproduct of the Archon War. Ah, Celestia, fucking things up again. You never cease to impress. Anyways, this fog is likely the main culprit for Tsurumi's downfall because of how it cut them off from the outside world, so they really didn't have a chance at all. Similarly to how an abuser would isolate the abused from ever getting help, this strange fog would keep the people of Tsurumi insulated from any other opinions on their activities. Ironically, the Thunderbird's lightning was able to disperse the fog, but because the fog did not harm the Thunderbird in any way, she probably didn't really care about it. This psychological isolation from any assenting opinions would cause the shamans of Tsurumi to continue practicing a useless ritual, sacrificing their young to a deity that did not care about them, justified in their beliefs that their actions were achieving their unknowingly wanton goals. Like I stated before, there were individuals on Tsurumi who were against the rituals, at least during the time when Ru was alive, and they would flee the island just before the catastrophe. These individuals would be Kama's ancestors, the ferryman that takes us to Tsurumi in the first place. So there was a point at which the majority of the people of Tsurumi could have been saved, but because of their dogmatic trust in a sacrificial ritual and an unshakable truth that had no evidence to back it up, the inhabitants of the island of Tsurumi would be wiped from the face of Teyvat. I must also contend that I believe the Thunderbird's mind may have already begun to erode, which could be what was causing it to constantly release lightning. Somehow, Ru's singing would affect the Thunderbird's erosion, and subsequently its constant release of lightning, which is what made Ru so important in the first place. If erosion is connected somehow to the abyss, which could be synonymous with darkness, than Ru's song would have, as the Thunder Summoner's crown states, bestowed upon it light. So, sadly, there can be no true intentional malice attributed anywhere in this story, and this makes it all the more tragic. But what do you think? Was this tragic event caused by a combination of simple misunderstandings? Is the Thunderbird an evil entity, or just another victim alongside the residents of Tsurumi? Is it just a coincidence that Celestia is again being implemented in another one of Teyvat's tragedies? If you have any questions regarding the story of Genshin Impact, let me know in the comments and I will do my best to answer them in future videos. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe. And thank you for visiting the psychological things of Teyvat.